Hi, I'm Chucky, and I'm your friend to the end. Heidi-ho!
My history with Chucky goes way back. Friday, August 30th, 1991, Child's Play 3 is released in theaters. Nearly a week later, Thursday, September 5th, 1991, your boy's little newborn ass takes his first gulps of oxygen. Some might say it's a coincidence. I think not. I think that was a moment in time where a collision course with my life and Chucky began, because eventually this little bastard caused me a ton of trouble in my young life, and I'm here to tell the story about it. So I don't remember even thinking about Chucky until I was about somewhere between 4 and 6 years old. I remember stumbling into the living room, and my mom and my older brother were watching a televised broadcast of Child's Play 2. It was toward the beginning of the movie where we first enter Chucky's POV. That moment where he reaches up and grabs the door handle, I was like, nope. I bailed. I ran up to my bedroom. I dove under my bed. I decided I'm just going to wait it out here. The longer I wait, the longer the movie will play on. It'll eventually be over. I can go downstairs and just move on with my life. That was the plan. But for some reason, there was a voice, an inner voice telling me, oh, what have you got to lose? You know, don't be so cowardly. Give it a try. So I decided to go give it a shot. I went downstairs, and the scene that I walked in on was the scene where Kyle finds Joanne's murdered corpse tied to a chair. Yeah, I lost it. I was scarred. I ran away. I went right back up to my bed, hid underneath the bed. I was chanting something to the effect of Chucky isn't real, or no more Chucky, as if it was some sort of protective spell. Now, I don't remember doing this myself, but this is what was reported to me by my family members, and I don't think that it's outside the realm of possibility, and as a matter of fact, I think it's probably true. I do remember being consumed by terror, almost so much that I couldn't move. From that point on, I couldn't even see Chucky's face without having a full-blown anxiety episode. My entire body would tremble, and I would look for any and every way out possible, true fight-or-flight moments. In the video store, I would look for other VHS tapes to put over the Child's Play movies, just so that I didn't have to look at Chucky's face. In the bigger retail stores like your Walmarts and your Kmarts, I would find out where the movies were, where the Chucky movies were, and I would just tunnel vision, look at something in the distance and walk right past them. At some point in time, a very weird looking doll ended up in my house. I'm not sure why it was there. There were no girls in my family, so it was odd that we had it in the first place. It was one of those dolls that when you moved it a certain way, its eyes would open and close, and at one point, my brother just casually mentioned, hey, that doll looks like Chucky. Great. Oh, it set me the fuck off. I had a massive anxiety attack. I ended up begging my father to set that doll the fuck on fire. And to my dad's credit, he took that little bastard outside, doused him in lighter fluid, and threw him in the burn barrel. He sent him straight to hell. But the war was not over. During all of this effort to avoid Chucky, I was growing more and more curious as to what exactly was happening in these movies. But although I was curious, I was still not courageous enough to watch a full Child's Play movie at the time. So I was left with hearsay and my imagination to sort of fill in the blanks as to what was going on in the films. And because of that, a lot of misinformation came my way. I remember hearing some of my older cousins talking about the Child's Play series. They talked about the kills, and they described them as these prolonged, disturbing, really graphic setups. And really, the setups were vastly impractical. The ways that they described these kills seemed outrageous, even for a movie about a killer doll. Thinking back on some conversations I had about Chucky back in the day too, I remember a girl in elementary school describing a scene from Bride of Chucky that years later I realized never actually occurred. Scream had drawn in a ton of fans into the horror genre that weren't there before. It had revamped it, sort of reignited the interest in horror. Horror was cool again because a lot of people were watching horror movies. There were a lot of people who were a little too sensitive to watch too many horror movies, which I was in that camp. But then there was the camp of people who were too sensitive to watch horror movies but were afraid to admit it in the public. And I think I was running into a lot of those people at that time. And it wasn't helping me. I wasn't learning anything about the Chucky movies like I wanted. I was sort of just spinning in circles and wondering a lot. And more I thought There was absolutely no way I was going to be able to dive into this series because it just sounds so incredibly messed up and vastly unpredictable. At some point, my nervousness turned to shame. I became so ashamed of myself for being afraid of a character I knew to be fictional that I thought nobody would want to be my friend if they ever found out the truth. I thought my life was over. I was very young, but those feelings felt so absolute, and that shame grew so much that there were even times where I thought about hurting myself. I know that sounds crazy, but when you're a kid, it's hard to think past the weekend, let alone to think 20 years in the future. And at that specific time, I just couldn't see a future where I possibly could feel normal. With the advent of the internet, my love for cinema really began to blossom, and by age 12, I was a massive film fan. I read as many movie books as I could get my hands on, and every week I tried my best to take in as many new movies as possible, either via the theater, on TV, or via physical media. I did have some genre safe spaces at that time, mostly sci-fi, fantasy, action-adventure type stuff, but from there, I propelled into what can be considered the classics. Somewhere along those lines, I found what would be my favorite film for the next decade, and that was Milos Forman's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. When I first saw that film, I was completely floored. I went to its Wikipedia page and I just started combing through the information. When looking at the cast list, there were tons of familiar names, tons of genre greats. Of course, the great Jack Nicholson, but there was Christopher Lloyd, Danny DeVito, Vincent Scavelli, Scatman Carruthers, Sidney Lassick, Michael Berryman. But the one name that stood out to me was one that I really didn't know. But the reason it stood out was because the character was, to me, the most interesting aspect of the movie and possibly the greatest performance aside from Jack Nicholson. And that was the character Billy Bibbit, who was played by some guy named Brad Dourif. Now, I had no idea who he was, but I was incredibly impressed by his acting abilities. With that good of a performance, he had to have been in some other films. So I quickly typed his name into a Google search and boom! There's Chucky's face everywhere. Now, at the time, I wasn't as disturbed by Chucky's face as I was in my elementary years, so to speak, but it was still very jarring. Jarring enough to me that I closed the webpage immediately and walked away from the computer. I stewed about it later on. It made absolutely no sense to me. I felt like I needed to hate Brad Dourif. It was a full circle moment for me because at that point in time, I realized that Brad Dourif was far more than just Chucky or Billy Bibbit. He'd played a ton of great characters in films that I really appreciated, like Grima Wormtongue in Lord of the Rings. He was the Exterminator in Stephen King's Graveyard Shift. He was the Gemini Killer in Exorcist 3, and he was that asshole Gettyman in Alien Resurrection. He also had a brilliant performance in a film called Mississippi Burning. I also liked his supporting role in a film called Body Parts. It's very brief, but it's great nonetheless. And I really appreciated his voice work in a game called Gun on PlayStation 2. He played one of the villains in that game. So with such a vast body of work that I respected, more and more as I'm reading his filmography, I'm realizing who this guy is and what he's about. I realized pretty quickly that I was just going to have to man the fuck up and watch a Chucky movie. So I hit up my TV guide. I found that the original was playing in a couple of days. I eagerly anticipated it, but when the day came, I was anything but ready to watch it. I stalled and I stalled. Eventually, got the courage, flipped it on. It was right in the midst of that final conflict between Andy, Karen, and Chucky. Karen has Andy at the end, or excuse me, Karen has Chucky at the end of the pistol, pulling the trigger. Nothing's happening. Chucky says, "What's wrong? Gun jam?" I immediately changed the channel right after that. I had dipped my toes in, and that was enough for the time being. I was feeling accomplished. Younger me, if I would have asked myself, would you watch 5 minutes of a Chucky movie, that 5-year-old me, 6-year-old me would have said, hell no, never. But I'd done it, so for the time being, I felt pretty good, but it wore off. I realized to feel like I'd actually conquered this fear, I was going to need to watch a Chucky movie from beginning to end. So I went back to the TV guide. I found that Child's Play 3 was coming up on TV. It just so happened that it fell on the same night as a birthday party of one of my friends, and I actually saw that as a golden opportunity because if I could watch the movie surrounded by other people, I thought that maybe I could put my fear aside a little bit and digest the movie a little bit better. Also, there were going to be girls at that party, so I was going to need to fully commit to watching the movie because if I didn't, I risked the chance of crashing and burning in front of all of them. So when the night finally came along, I campaigned to watch Child's Play 3 like a slimy government lobbyist. We turned the movie on right at the beginning, right into those opening credits. We watched it as a group together, and I loved every minute of it. We laughed, we talked through it, and I didn't expect it to be that much fun. It was the first time that I really understood the power of a shared experience, at least in terms of movies and cinema. Now, I had a ton of great theater experiences growing up. Even though I was shoulder to shoulder with packed crowds time and time again, it always felt very singular to me. The joy I had from that experience really helped shape my beliefs regarding horror. I believe that if you don't appreciate horror, you don't appreciate cinema overall. Now, the casual moviegoer is forgiven. I'm not judging anyone here. I'm just of the opinion that I'm sure many others are too, that horror movies can be just as substantive as any other film genre. Now, before I came to that conclusion, I bought Child's Play through Bride of Chucky. I watched the movies over and over again, and I was ashamed at what I'd missed out on for so many years. Looking back, it's pretty funny that I used to think that I was the only person that was haunted by Chucky, when in reality there were kids all over the world that were just as traumatized as me. Never in a million years would 5 to 12-year-old me believe that Chucky movies would bring me this much joy, but that's my reality now. I watch these movies, rewatch these movies regularly, and I never really get tired of going back to them. So that's my history with Chucky. Thanks for sticking around to hear my story. What's your history with Chucky? Are you a casual fan, or do you have an age-old story like me? Definitely feel free to share your story down in the comments. Leave a like on the video and subscribe if you aren't already. And until next time, stay safe out there.